Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Korapati from Cambian Lab. With me is my colleague, Hiren Shah and Manish Mathur. Today's session, we are going to be covering the topic of supplier development. We think it is one of the most practical paths to building a better supply chain. In terms of agenda, we have broken the session into three parts. In the first part, we will be discussing a little bit about supplier development and the different elements of supplier development. In the second part, we will be showing a demonstration of the supplier development framework and various assessments and workflows that we have developed based on our workflow engine. That should take about 25-30 minutes. The first part, we'll keep it as short as possible, but you can expect it to be around 10 minutes or so. The last 15 minutes, we've dedicated it to Q&A. For the sake of continuity, we are going to answer all the questions in the last 15 minutes. And if there are any questions that we are not able to answer, we will answer via email, as well as the note that will be sent out once the recording is available. We'll also send all of our contact information, and if needed, we can get on a one-on-one session to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, if you have any questions while the presentation or the demo is going on, we request you that you type in that question in the Q&A tab of the Zoom webinar, Zoom application. So that would be number 4 icon, which says Q&A on your Zoom bar. Okay, if you can type it in, firstly, it will be recorded so that everyone can see the Q&A. And when we are answering, we can go look at the Q&A section and answer all the questions. Okay. So with that, let me get started. A little bit about Cambian Lab. We are based out of California in San Francisco Bay Area. Most of us come from the industry with significant experience in new product development and supplier development. In industries where supply chains play a big role. In addition to having the operational experience, we also spent several years in a few software companies that support ERP and supply chain. So we have the experience to really understand, from an operational needs perspective, what is the best approach to support. We will cover that using our workflow engine today. And in terms of panelists, I and Hiren are going to be participating today and taking in the questions and presenting. So as mentioned, we have 20 plus experience as an operational people, both in new product development and supply chain development and software development. Okay, so the need for supplier development, has always been there. Although it was not very evident before the pandemic. To a large extent, I know everyone is getting tired of this whole pandemic, but from a supply chain perspective, supply chain as a function, supplier development as a function, this has been a before and after type of event. And the reason being, before this pandemic, and I was in automotive industry, and there was quite a bit of supply chain at that point. Most of the focus was very heavily on cost, and the relationship tended to be somewhat of a transactional relationship. Hey, we're buying from you, so do your job type of approach. You could, that's a, common mindset that, most industries adopted, especially working with suppliers. However, the tables have turned now where to be able to work with a supplier in a close manner as a trusted partner has become more important, which means, you're from a supply chain perspective, you're trying to build some resilience. You would like your suppliers to be as high performing as possible. and you have a stake in it, and you actually have to work for that with your supply chains. And one of the things that we have observed is today most companies are adding more suppliers as opposed to trimming suppliers. And there is a reason for that. Obviously shortages are one of the big issues, but you also want a supply chain that is able to serve you in a global fashion as well as a local, from a local perspective as well. So that means most of the time you will end up having more suppliers as you go forward right now. In terms of supplier development, we put supplier development at a higher level than any of the procure to pay strategic sourcing type of approaches because it does involve quite a bit of work, number one. And there are many, many more things that you would do with suppliers as part of supplier development than you would if you were just focusing on strategic sourcing or procure to pay. The important thing, however, is the strategic value for suppliers is very high from what you do as part of supplier development. And there is quite a bit of research. I think one paper, you get this, you can download this paper by Dr. Robert Hanfield, and they have done quantitative research on this, where supplier development actually does influence and improve, several of the key supplier performance metrics that you normally use to work with supply chains, right? So you can look at that. The link here provides the source research article. But this is kind of well known. If you ask many strategic sourcing or supply chain teams, they know supplier development positively impacts supplier performance and consequently your firm performance. However, supplier development progression, as we had indicated, is quite a bit of work. It's not, you send a PO and it's done, right? So you would want to, as part of progressing the suppliers throughout this development cycle, if we were to call it, you go through several steps. They can start off as a potential suppliers. You like them, you evaluate them that they can do the job. You might qualify the supplier. When you start actually doing business with them, they become active suppliers. And the goal is to get as many suppliers into this preferred box where they are a very high performing supplier and they should be given the first choice when you have a need that they can meet. It's also a very close working relationship with the supplier, so they also trust you as a customer, right? And as to make this happen, this progression, you have to do a lot of supplier development activities. A few of them we've included here, some of the techniques and what you could be doing. And these activities and this whole progression is based upon what we call assessments and understanding how capable the suppliers are and how well they perform for you as a customer, right? So there's capability issue as well as performance issue. And one of our my daughter's softball coach used to say that potential is not the same as performance. So you could have a very highly capable supplier, but they may or may not perform well. So you need to really look at from both angles, capability as well as performance for you as a customer. And you can do that using various evaluations, audits, and performance assessments, which we'll cover today. The other important thing to keep in mind is, given that supplier development can be fairly intensive, the good thing is you don't need to practice supplier development or put in place supplier development for every supplier. Generally, if the needs are well known and the items are mostly commodities that you can buy off the shelf, no real assessments of suppliers are needed. They're just going to send it for the spec every time. You don't need to do anything. There is no need. However, if the Suppliers are providing you with production parts, production services, which are pretty critical for your product or for your service. And you have to make sure that they can design and validate the subsystem or the component or the service and actually make it in volume and at production scale at the level of quality that you need. This is where supplier development activity becomes very important. And then they're able to, during the production phase, continuously improve, right? So not everyone needs supplier development, but when needed, you need to really look at what should you focus on and what are the stages where the supplier development activities should be most needed. Now, given that picture, one of the things that we found when we are working with customers is there is no systematic process to support supplier development. I mean, there are lots of systems and processes for sourcing and procurement and PO collaboration and all of that, but none exists today for supplier development. What is the framework that we can use, and how can we operationalize supplier development at scale, right? So that has been missing, and that's what prompted us to really build out this whole supplier development framework and all the supporting workflows and assessments. So if you notice, we set up several of these different workflows at different stages of the supplier development relationship, the stages as well. And they are based upon a number of assessments as well as different workflows that are commonly used as part of supplier development process. Some of them, you may be doing already. What we have seen is there's a lot of, all of these are in one shape or another being practiced. However, not well put together, not operationalized, or done in a very ad hoc fashion. So our attempt with this framework with our workflow engineers to make this really, really easy and be able to apply it at scale with your supply chain. While these are the things that you will see, you have every capability to build your own supplier development framework using zFlow. So one of the things that we know is that you do have supplier manuals, you have various procedures that you already put in place to work with your supply chain, and you just want to operationalize, digitize all of that with your supply chain. You can do that as well. So if you have a supplier development framework already in place, you can build it on top of this framework to suit your needs. And like a few things that make it very applicable. One of the things that we've thought about zFlow, because it is a workflow engine designed for supply chains, is that suppliers, for many companies, suppliers are more or less integral to how you design, manufacture, and deliver products, right? They should be, ideally speaking, be able to work it in the same room and be on the same page. That's our design principle here. So there are lots of things that come together to make it that possible. And that's one of the reasons why we thought, supplier development is something that we can support very well and easily. So here are the few things that we will start to see as part of the demo. And some of the things that we'll today include some assessments that you can do as a start when you're looking at, hey, what do we do and how should we focus our supplier development efforts. And then we'll also look at some innovative approaches for evaluations, and especially when you're bringing in new suppliers, what's the ideal way to do it, and make that possible in a cross-functional manner. And just selecting a supplier is not enough, and especially if they're going to be providing production parts and services. You may have to go through a lot of checks and audits and readiness checks, right? So that's something that you should be able to design, customize, and do it for categories of suppliers or individual suppliers. We'll also look a little bit into supplier quality engineering. There are lots of sometimes ideas and thoughts about supplier quality engineering. It's somewhat of an ambiguous area, but to a large extent, it is, in our eyes, what you do quality engineering within your own organization when that is applied to suppliers. Final one is, the importance of periodic performance reporting and internal assessment of suppliers. You need to be able to give feedback to suppliers. Hey, how are they doing? And we'll look at a couple of examples like that. So one of the things that is critical for all of this to be effective is, we need to be able to work with a lot of different systems that come into play when you're working with supply chains. Primarily, I would say ERP systems and design systems. So we have a way to connect all of that directly to the source systems to get data, as well as put data back into those systems. So if we have to make a case for supplier development internally, we would leave it with 3 points that you can highlight, right? Supplier readiness. A lot of times supplier readiness is very important, especially during NPI programs. You definitely want high-performing suppliers, as many as possible, and robust and resilient supply chain. And in terms of their capacity, individual suppliers' capacity to be able to keep providing services and products amid a lot of uncertainty, but also you'd want to build out more capacity in your supply chains. Most of the time, more suppliers per component. So with that, what I'll do is get into the demo. So initially, we're going to look at, how do we get started? Second, we'll look at, if we are bringing in new suppliers, what are some of the techniques that we can use to, bring them on board, select them, and, before they are providing any production parts or services, how do you get them, do some readiness checks, audits, and finally, once they start to do production work, how do you give feedback? Okay. Part of that, we'll also look at some quality issues, corrective actions that may be needed between your organization and supply chains. So with that, what you can see here is I'm sharing my supplier development portal. This is the view of an organization. So if you are, let's say, head of corporate supplier development or leading corporate supplier development activities, you get a number of workflows and assessments that are relevant from a supplier development perspective. Here you can see that look at starting the process to providing feedback to suppliers throughout the life cycle. The other thing that you will also see here is there are certain cross-functional aspects to working with suppliers. A lot of times, you may need to collaborate with your quality teams to see how suppliers are doing. Sometimes you may have continuous improvement projects with suppliers. And in terms of NPI sourcing, a lot of the needs come typically from product engineering and component engineering. So you need to be able to have that visibility into all of these different processes and connect to these processes so that you can support supplier development activities well. So that's this thing. We'll come quickly into when suppliers log in. To the left, I'm going to be logging in as a supplier, and you can see how they will be able to work with your organization, very seamlessly. One of our design goals with zFlow is that suppliers be able to work with you as if they are in the same room and ideally on the same page with respect to a particular workflow process, some issue that's come up or something that they have to do with you collaboratively. So it's a lot of everything that we do in zFlow is very cross-functional, so they can come in and out as and when needed. So if we were to start supplier development process, right? Where do you start? There are a couple of places. One is, hey, we're going to look at our supply base completely, right? Based upon different commodities and different parts, components. We can look at our supply base. The other need. So if I look at our supply base, I can see that there are lots of suppliers. Different suppliers at different maturity levels. We'll look into the details shortly. And then the relationship status includes, we have a lot of qualified active suppliers, enough preferred, but ideally preferred should be as big as possible, right, within this whole pie. And lots of different types of suppliers, right, from contract manufacturers to distributors and systems integrators. So all of them, this is heavily tuned towards a little bit on production parts and services. So although it is designed for such needs, you can also apply this for especially MRO type of goods and services that go into production processes. So, if you're doing a lot of capital equipment, et cetera, you might still be able to use this. And if we come back here, we have all these different suppliers. Like, let's focus on Intel here today. So you can see that Intel, we have details about Intel. Things that we keep track of from a supplier development perspective is relationship status, maturity level, capability, categories. So those are important because different types of supplier categories and maturity levels may need different supplier development needs, right? The other thing that you can also see is that we have a couple of users. So these are users, what we call the users from the supplier side. So here, as you can see, Chris Gorapati here is a supplier admin for Intel. Chris Gorapati actually, as a matter of fact, is Intel person. So and throughout this demo, you will see that when Intel is participating in particular workflows, they can log in and work with you as if they are in the same room. That's our goal. Okay. And of course, we do have the full profile in terms of, basic information to contacts, to certifications needed, and, audit status and development projects. And of course, some of these suppliers may be providing to different plants within your organization. They maybe have supplied different divisions. So you'll have a very, very good profile as you keep working with your supplier on how they're doing and what is expected of them from a supplier development perspective. The other way, so there are some needs there from a supplier development perspective, just looking at our supply base, right? If you look at, by commodity code and by suppliers by commodity code, these are based upon parts, mostly materials in the world of SAP, that, you have various commodities. You probably are organized along these lines. That's very common. Like if you're in PCAs and mechanical assemblies and labels and accessory kits. So your buyers and supplier development, quality engineering teams can organize the work accordingly based upon commodity codes as well. Okay, and coming back to the scenarios where NPI plays a big role. When you're working on NPI scenarios, it is common to work with parts and products. So your sourcing needs come from the perspective of, hey, we are going to make this product, ZPhone X. It is made up of all of these different components, right? Some of them are new, some of them are existing components. And some of them are quite tricky in terms of sourcing perspective. So if you look at memory or, right, it's a high in demand right now. It's very hard to get, so you need, more, qualified suppliers for that. So things of that are pretty common when you're looking at NPI. And during the NPI stage, you will be doing a lot of sourcing activities, preparing for readiness activities, NPI builds and so on. So this is another time to get involved and look at, hey, what are my needs, right? So here, obviously, A10X is a part. Intel, the good thing is Intel is already qualified and, already gave a lot of data from a lead time cost perspective, and it's been qualified into production yet. However, if I look at the full bill of material here, all the way down to the deep, you have lots of components without any approved suppliers yet, right? So that's where the NPI sourcing actually comes into play, right? And we only have, given that, let's say Z-Phone X is very important for you, you want as many suppliers within this, for this product into the preferred stage as possible. That means, you need to develop all of these active suppliers and qualified suppliers into the preferred stage, right? So that's another way to look at it. And you get a full picture of the supply chain assessment with respect to a bill of material. So this is where, if you're doing a lot of NPI sourcing around parts and components, you'll see where the needs are, right? So all of these where there is no approved supplier, external manufacturing or external source are candidates for actual work from a sourcing perspective. So this is the picture that you have. Now, the sourcing needs, however, generally start from engineering, right? So we have certain workflows that people can use to request, hey, we need to find a new source. We have this workflow, something called, it's a very commonly used workflow in component requests, right? And we know we have this part A10X, we need to find a new component or multiple manufacturers to qualify for this component. Right, so here in this case, you can see that Intel is being suggested as the new supplier that we need to for this part. And please go ahead and do this. So this actually automatically, this is a request that can be initiated by your engineering team to get sourcing work started. And it is designed so that different roles can play different activities, or different roles can do different activities as part of this process. So what we allow you to do is design this process, this sourcing initiation processes, the way it should work, right? Based upon your company's policy. A lot of them have quality management policies to support these types of activities. And the people will start to come in. So if you look at this member, the actual teams like component engineering, purchasing, design, etc., play a role in a cross-functional manner to get this ball rolling from a sourcing perspective, right? So we need Intel. Yes, the part is qualified. We are happy with it from a design and component engineering perspective. Now to get started to bring on Intel as a new manufacturer. They could also, instead of component engineering, a lot of times MRO, capital equipment, and other raw materials, they might just still come and say, hey, we just need a new supplier. Okay, that can look a little bit different from a component manufacturer request, right? So here we have a workflow. Again, all of these workflows can be designed. There are some that come out of the box that you can use, and or you can design it per the spec that is already written in your supplier manuals or sourcing processes. So here in this case, it's a little bit more evolved because it's a general purpose supplier request. People Purchasing is going to review. Supplier risk analysis is done by risk, finance or corporate supplier development teams. And then once the supplier is approved, you can choose to create the vendor in SAP and onboard all of them, so on. So this is something that you can build it yourself. The workflow takes over. People can request it. Different people will do different things as part of this workflow. And you always have an idea of what is going on at any given time. Part of that is we also integrate with different systems like banking systems for validation checks. Is it real customer, real company or not? So those are all things that you can do. So different ways for your teams to get started, from a requesting for new suppliers. Now, once you have a new supplier request, there are many things that you need to do. You might, the first thing I think before you say we are ready to give business is you might want to just check, is this supplier capable of doing this work, right? You can do that with a couple of different techniques. One is you can actually do a new supplier evaluation, or do something what we call a supplier capability assessment. Right, so here we are doing a supplier capability assessment for Broadcom, right? The category is this thing, it's commodities processors, right? And the weights that we want to use when we are doing assessments look something like this, right? We want to really look at the supplier capacity along these different criteria, what we call. And you always give weights, so that the comparison is between apples to apples as opposed to apples to oranges when you have multiple suppliers trying the same commodity, or how do you evaluate from different types of commodities. So these weights could vary depending upon the type of commodity, different type of customer and type of need. So once you have that, you can get this assessment values from different teams within your organization of how the supplier potentially could do. And you will actually give a capability score for this customer, right? So that's based upon what people feel about the supplier capability, right, to do the job that you're expecting. And again, it is important that you need to be able to measure the capability against the job, against the expectation of the supplier, because someone that is going to provide paper and pencil ought to be measured very differently from someone that is going to provide you with production parts and services, right? So you can do this capability assessment. Again, at this point, the suppliers are not, they're not members yet. So we are not logged in as a supplier. And so let's say once that is finished, you do qualify it as a supplier. Supplier is onboarded as a qualified supplier, but not necessarily you really haven't given any business yet. So at this point, you can also run some what we call sourcing evaluations. There are always an opportunity to get different, for a particular type of sourcing event, input and feedback from multiple suppliers, right? Generally, there is a technique that we use for the same need against the same qualification criteria. You can actually get some scores on how different suppliers are doing. Based upon our 0 to 100 scoring mechanism, right? So you can also do some sourcing analysis, and a lot of the sourcing assessments are based upon you can send out an RFP. An RFP can be made up of lots of questions as well as line items against which the RFP the customers, or rather suppliers, can provide their bid. I mean, we don't call it bid, but it's at least their what can they do in terms of pricing and so on, right? The various angles that you want to measure. So if you look at RFP, one of the things that we've made really possible is to make the RFP process as simple as needed. So you are inviting a couple of suppliers. One is Intel, which is an existing supplier. And then you also have a new supplier that can join in this process. So what they will do at this point is, if you notice, since we have two suppliers, we want both of them to answer. So here, now I'm going to log in as actually Intel, right? Because I would have gotten an email. So a lot of times when suppliers get activities, they get these kinds of emails, right? So you have some work to do, please go ahead and log into the system and do that job. So here to the left, I'm logging in as Intel, the supplier. Okay, so if you notice here, there is an internal view, which has a lot more things, and a supplier view, right? So when Intel has to respond to this RFP, they actually get a workflow. So you notice here, this workflow is broken down into the RFP setup and the RFP response process for each supplier. So each of the suppliers get these RFP responses. They can just go ahead and provide that information, right? In this case, Intel already answered. So they said, can your company deliver China, US? Does your company have IATF certification? It says yes, yes. And they also can provide the pricing per unit of measure. That's all we were asking them to do right now. And what is the design cost? So you can use this information to do the sourcing evaluations. Who is the better based upon all the information that you get. And it's very, very easy. If the suppliers, existing suppliers or the new suppliers, they get invited via email. And when they log in, they will do exactly what they they need to do. These things show up as activities, RFP response. They can just go ahead and fill that thing. Very, very straightforward. You don't need to do any more training, etc. This is like how people are used to getting an email and going in and filling in whatever is expected of them. Right. The other thing that we want to also highlight here is this is a very popular aspect. We do provide suppliers, because Intel is an existing supplier. Obviously, they've been providing parts and services to us. It is a good idea for them to understand how are they doing, right? So here they can select supplier performance. Okay, the pop-up is getting blocked. Let me move that. So, so they actually get a picture of how they're doing. Again, this performance score is a weighted average score, so that many, many different elements are actually used to come up with this performance score, right? And part of that could be, these types of different elements that are playing a role in the overall performance, right? Cost, quality, service level, and you can go to any levels of, performance assessment areas. So we'll look at that shortly. So they can also get the full previous periods, different KPI trends that are being assessed, from a customer, from a supplier perspective. So they have a view into how they are doing as of now and the previous periods. The other thing is when, so this is as if they are working through, right? So they are, if you look at all the different workflows here, anything that is listed here means that they can actually participate in those workflows, like, corrective actions and PPAPs, right? Supply initiated PPAPs, PPAPs assigned to them. Same thing, failure reports and non-conformances. If they get any, they will immediately get notified. If you're doing any active 8D problem solving process with the supplier, they get notified and they'll participate in this process. So what we want to do, and these are all part of supplier development activities, right? You can't isolate supplier development into some other area. So these are common day-to-day work that you have to do with the suppliers. Our goal is to make it as if suppliers can come in, participate in what you expect them to do as actors. They can also initiate some things. For example, if you look at audits, self-audits, they can initiate their own self-audits. If they're expected to do an audit, it'll show up for them, and they just go ahead and answer the questions. And as far as their work is done, they're finished, right? So all suppliers are placed exactly at that level of activity that they need to, by using the emails and this activity links, right? So they, all of these are different activities the suppliers have to do. Right. So as you can see, we are still working them through the process of actually getting them ready for production. Right. Part of that could be this audit they have to do. It could be as simple as these are initial. This is a more of a front end type of audit, but you can, as they progress during the life cycle, they're ready to make parts and in volume. You might actually use something what we call a production part approval process. This is become a very popular process across the board. Although initially it was designed for the automotive industry, in the automotive industry, so that suppliers can reliably produce production parts per the spec, right? And supplier PPAPs we consider it to be gold standard when in terms of checking for supplier readiness, right? Part of that is you're expecting them to complete all of these different activities and provide information with respect to the various elements of production readiness, right? In addition, you also have different workflows so that people can actually do the job, and you do some reviews and approvals, all of that, right? So when you assign supplier PPAPs to suppliers, and you finish this workflow, right? Final phase and phase readiness. So you can see all the different activities that are part of these these workflows. So let me pick one here. It's quite so these are all the things that suppliers are doing. So you can assign them tasks, or you can actually also make it very, very simple. So supplier initiated, there's something called supplier initiated PPAP, where they create the package and send it to you. These are all the different packages, and all you do is approve that. Package preparation is done by the supplier, and internally you review the package and approve it. So when the package is approved, that means supplier is ready to provide from a production parts perspective. So these are all different elements that they can submit. So if I look at for example, here is FMEA. This FMEA, actually, it includes 2 FMEAs, different FMEAs, and they can actually submit it as a document or as an internal FMEA document itself. So many ways for them to work with you throughout the cycle. And so now that they are ready for production, you've approved the PPAP, they're ready, and they'll start to provide you with parts. So it is at this point we have designed a workflow for supplier performance reporting. So if you notice here in the supplier launchpad, the performance report, this is designed to go once every month. where you provide a report of this is how you're doing for this month, right? This is of course for July 2021, but this is sent to the supplier automatically. So, and you can send this to suppliers at scale, so they know where they stand in terms of performance for that period. Of course, they can always go to live performance views here and then get the information, the details as well. But this supplier performance reporting, a monthly performance reporting, actually helps them understand, hey, this is, we all see it. It is approved by our internal teams, and you're getting it. Please acknowledge that, right? So, as you're doing all of this work, you want to be able to also provide some view of what we call performance assessment. The performance assessment is a little bit different from what I would call performance reporting, because performance reporting is based on KPIs. Performance assessment is based upon how different internal teams feel about this supplier. So you have to run a survey internally, and we recommend that you only do this once every 6 months or so, because it's a pretty involved activity in terms of getting your internal production, quality engineering, design teams, and test engineering, so on, right? So then a lot of different rules, different people play a part in providing this assessment to the supplier. So this is something then once you give a score, hey, how are you guys doing? And you can even break it down to the level of a program, especially if suppliers are supporting multiple programs on this. So you can go ahead and make this available. And once it's internally published for the specific supplier, you can share that with the supplier here. So we think this is a very, very good way for you to at least give feedback to suppliers. This is like this happens a lot in internal performance feedbacks. I know a lot of it, it's not very liked, but at least you need to see this as an improvement opportunity for suppliers. Hey, which is the area that you should really focus on from an improvement perspective? And again, this, what is the category area criteria is something that you can design it yourself. We've set it up so that here you can see some examples, but in most cases, you have your own criteria for how to assess supplier performance. So we have capability, and then we have performance. Performance is real, right? They are actually doing the work now, and they have to, based upon the work, you are providing them feedback. Hey, this is where you stand. And so once that is done, I think at this point it is really in terms of, hey, what can we do, right? A lot of times, they still have non-conformances, corrective actions. Suppliers can actually come in and respond to corrective actions that are directed at them. Here is a corrective action that, based on an audit that we found that Intel needs to do from a corrective action perspective, which is they're not doing as good a job of sub-supplier management. The ask from us as a corrective action is please implement it and do it on a particular date, and we will verify once it is done, right? So you can look at it like that, and your quality engineering, supplier development teams will kind of actively play a part in this workflow so that they can review the corrective action implementation and close it out once it is done. So so with that, I'll stop. I'll keep the last 10 minutes for answering Q&A. And let's see. Please go ahead.
Chris, there was a question on repository and where we can keep documents for suppliers.
Yeah, so suppliers can actually, there is a repository that is available for suppliers. Here, of course, everything is here. Suppliers can also, there's the company-wide supplier management documentation that you want to share with suppliers. You can expose this common repository, put all the different documents here, and then expose it to suppliers. So when they come with the Launchpad here, they will have either a repository or another section called manuals and documents, standard manuals and standard documents. So that's one easy way to share all of your standard information. Is there a location where we can upload certifications from suppliers? Yes, supplier certifications can be added just either suppliers can add it themselves, or you can also add it at the level of the certification, right? So if here we have a supplier profile, let me pick up Intel as a supplier profile. Let's say you have certification here, and you can put the data exactly at the level of the certification. Okay, the document link is not activated here, but you can put it wherever it is needed. So just to give you that example of, for example, for PPAP, right? We were looking at the design FMEA. So when you actually open the design FMEA, you will see that it has a couple of attachments. I pick attachment, all of the attachments related to that design FMEA element are stored here. Okay, so that capability is available everywhere, right? You want to, either at the supplier level or supplier elements, the different aspects of the supplier.
Another question was the ability to import export from Excel.
Yes, import and export Excel is pretty much everywhere. It is at the level of every, for example, if you look at this PPAP here, right? So you will always see something called, import from Excel and export to Excel. Given that we, each of these workflows have different data sets, you want to call it. The export Excel actually provides that format on what you can use. So, you don't have to design anything. You just export it and use the same export to import the Excel into any of these workflows. Beyond that, from an administration perspective, we also provide lots of data loading, using CSV and Excel. Right, so different ways of bringing in data very easily.
There's a question on integration with REST API-based system.
Yes, so integration is very one of the distinguishing features of zFlow. As you can see, it is connected directly to lots of different systems. Because we are so involved in NPI sourcing, you're connecting to design systems, a lot of SAP, Oracle for existing supplier information, to create new suppliers directly after onboarding process. Those are all supported directly out of the box. And the way that is done, so that is, you saw the list of systems it is connected to. In addition to that, it is also, for each of the systems, you can look at, let's say I pick Cambrian Lab SAP. Okay, or let's just pick all of them. See these interfaces, which is, these are essentially, some of them are REST API and some of them are using some libraries that belong to that software. In the case of SAP, it's a library that belongs to that software. Right? So in the case of Salesforce, for example, is a good example of a REST API. Right? Let's say if I want to get a quote, we just call that API. That's it. And it happens very naturally as part of the process. So, okay, so this is the get data is the name of the API.
So there was a question on how do suppliers get notified on email notification.
Yeah, so anytime suppliers are part of a workflow, they get an email, something like this. So if you look at supplier survey, right, suppliers are actually getting a notification here. You can click here. This is a very innovative one that we've developed for a company that is interested in surveying suppliers. So it will send a notification like this so that they can join in and participate in these workflows. One of the things that you have to keep in mind, supplier onboarding can be a total pain. It actually, we know supplier onboarding stopping many or being the root cause of supplier development or supplier management programs, failures, right? One of the things that we've actually made it possible, and I'll show you as a workflow is, suppliers can, if they have an email and you're not interested in them becoming like onboarded as suppliers, or you just need them to participate in one small thing activity, you can still do that with. So here is a good example of this voice of supplier. So these are these are just emails, right? Nothing else. They're not even being added as users. However, they can actually go to a URL, and here they're asking about 5-6 questions. How are you doing? This is a voice of supplier survey, and based on their answers, each of them can give an answer, and we actually calculate some metrics on how suppliers' perception of you as a customer. Okay. So yeah, and for this one, they don't even need an account. Actually, they log in as a guest, and we keep track of who is logging in as guest and what it is, but you don't need the heavy process of onboarding and setting up a supplier and all of that. If they have an email, they can participate in activities as a guest. However, their email, even though they log in as a guest, we know how they're using the guest account to, who is that user that is logging in and answering questions.
There's a question on whether we provide sample templates or in the system that people can copy.
Yes. So all of these templates, the templates that we have for major processes like RFP, RFQs, and supplier evaluation, supplier capability assessments. These are templates that you can use. There's a model, there's a data model, and some analytics and assessments associated with those templates. However, you also have the capacity, even within the template, to adjust the workflow. A good example here is a new supplier request. This is the workflow that we've set up. However, you can take this and follow exactly how you do today in your organization. So there's something called process templates. We give you a designer here, workflow designer, that you can use to So here, and it's something that even business users can actually do, right? Design the workflow the way it should be, and what the roles are, what the workflow should be, who the members are. This is something that you can design ahead of time, or you can set up which member plays which role when you create a new instance of this workflow, new request, you could call it.
If you're okay, we can continue with a few more questions. Some others are dropping. The question is, are there automatic internal notifications to suppliers that are supported?
Yes, any activity that is here, which is assigned to a supplier, suppliers automatically get noted. And that's one of the reasons why we have this supplier launchpad and supplier activity. This thing is because they do get notified for anything that they're expected to do as part of these workflows.
Can you drill down a little bit more into how zFlow can alleviate the onboarding, supplier onboarding challenges?
So a supplier onboarding process, you can look at it as, so a good example here is a new supplier request, right? You could, if you're starting with a new supplier request, you can do a couple of things. Now this is roughly, you can see this as a onboarding process, right? Although there are some qualification work that is going on. This could be set up as like, 5 different, 10 different additional steps or 2 more additional steps. So when you say a new supplier request should come, they can automatically, based upon the request here, like an email, right? So this is the contact information. You want to onboard this person as this new supplier and Intel, right? So what this does, this workflow actually does, is it invites that supplier representative, here Chris Gorpati, saying, hey, why don't you, this is them, actually we shut it down. Suppliers can come in and provide this input here. I mean, they're not yet a supplier, but Chris Gorpati can come in, fill in all this information, attach, any W-9 documents or, all the certifications that you're expecting. Obviously they don't even need to see company code, purchasing org. Once all of this is done, in this workflow, they can do actually bulk of the work. Okay, we've shut off these 2 activities actually in this workflow example. So they can do it. And then once you set it up, the supplier is approved, the vendor is actually created in SAP, and they will then get this supplier launchpad. Okay, now you're in. So this is where you can start to work with us, right? They can maintain their profiles themselves. They can, if there is no profile at all, they can add new ones, submit profile changes. They can start to get performance and so on, participate in workflows in which they can play a role or a part. So yeah, it's through this new supplier request, we've activated a lot of supplier accounts and onboard suppliers. And also, update all the backend systems where the supplier record needs to be created. Hopefully that's helpful, but it's a very, very simple process. Starts off as no supplier and then ends up as, creating all the accounts, collects all the information directly from the supplier if needed, and, creates the portal account, etc.
We still have about 45 attendees logged in. One of the questions is about, can you talk a little bit about pricing? Is it by user, usage, instance?
Yeah. So we, given that zFlow is a workflow engine, we have to be, there is a possibility that hundreds of users can come in, hundreds of suppliers can participate with a supplier account or without a supplier account, right? So we give that flexibility just to get out of this onboarding hell. So we've made the pricing very simple. It is really based upon, as you can see, there's no limit. It could be 10 or 1,000 or 10,000, doesn't matter. It comes with all the templates which you can use to use as it is, or design certain workflows or make adjustments where needed. Of course, you can also design something brand new using these workflow templates. After that, it's just a matter of how much usage are you going to see. The usage is primarily around the number of workflows and the number of people that may be joining in, right? So we provide a guidance, but we really never put any limits on what you can and cannot do. It also comes with all the integration adapters to SAP and other systems. So you don't have to spend any more on other integration related requirements. But if you have lots of users logging in, tens of thousands of workflows, we kind of use this as a guidance. But the good thing is you can increase or decrease usage whenever you want. And if you say that, yeah.
There's a question on how can somebody take it for a test drive or try it out or a proof of concept?
Yeah, so we can definitely support that. We have a few options, and let me. So test drive is we create a system that automatically is done, right? It comes with out-of-the-box workflows that you can use. You can still change them yourself. We have a concept of proof of concept where you can design, our team will work with you to design some of your existing workflows. You can pick one or two. Two is a good number. One simple and one complex. We can work with you, and it runs all of on our cloud framework. And the final one, pilot, for a few customers, we've supported pilots where it is almost looks like a production deployment, only for a small set of users. All three, we support if needed. Yep.
There's a question on approximately how long does a reflow project take?
You should have something up and running in in 6 to 8 weeks, and depending upon the scope, how much you want to accomplish, I'd say 2 to 3 months is a good time frame.
There's a question, can I have daily quality reports updated by the factory that will also give a notification that the report was updated? Trying to unpack that question. But perhaps you can just address the question.
Yeah, so yes, it can definitely connect to manufacturing quality reports. Typically, incoming quality of suppliers, right, or non-conformances, or these are quality issues, etc. That they come from plants, and you can make them, if they're related to supplier, root cause is supplier, you can automatically send it to the suppliers saying, hey, this is an issue caused by you. It can also, people can also do a little bit of due diligence on it, fishbone diagrams, recommended action. Here, the recommended action is supplier corrective action, right? So yes, you can directly connect it to a lot of quality issues that can start anywhere. Okay.
Lastly, or at least for right now. The question is, is there a checklist for onboarding? Can you have a workflow of various activities, and then as the various pieces are completed, you can check them off as part of the template?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one such actually, the one so checklist is actually a PPAP checklist that we saw. Right, and this is kind of considered as a checklist item because it's a list of items that people have to check off. Done, required, supplier comment, and it can actually also initiate a workflow, each of these items. Okay. Yeah, checklists are very, very used extensively throughout these workflows. And checklist, can be whether it is finished or not, based upon a workflow, can also be automated.
There's a question on the involvement necessary from IT for programming, or whether this can be done by a business user.
To a large extent, I would say how you want to design these workflows and the supplier management framework can be done by business. No need for IT at all. The one place where IT should be involved is if you need integration to existing systems. Like, let's say you have vendor masters, etc., in like SAP, Oracles, and others, right? We do need to. That's where IT can be involved, and they'll set up the integration and maybe do a little bit of work themselves on the integration side. However, we support a lot of the integration. We take it as our responsibility. So to minimize the. Mm-hmm.
I think those are all the questions we had so far.
Okay. All right. Again, we want to thank you for your time. And I know we went a little bit past the scheduled hour, but it's still, it's always a good idea to answer the questions. Now, we're going to be closing the session in a minute. But before we do it, just a few logistics. Once the recording is available, we will send the link to it as well as the presentation, so you have access to it. We'll also include our contact information. Again, all of these three are things that we support for a lot of our prospects and customers. So please feel free to take advantage of these three options to test, or even have it like almost come close to being a real solution that you can actually use. And we'll have our contact information. So if you need to reach out to us, you have additional questions, feel free to do so. Again, thank you for your time. Have a great day.